Hey everyone, how are you? Hang with me a minute. We'll get started in just a second. Everybody, hang on just a sec. We'll go and get started in just a moment. Setting a few things up. Let's go popular. There. Sign in. Oh. Just trying to find an image of it so I can see who's showing up and when. Hey. Excellent. Laura, hey there. How are you? Wade, my friend, what's happening? Thomas, all right. Some people are starting to pile on. Let's give them just a moment and we will begin. All right. Hopefully you guys brought some questions. Sip, and I'm ready. Paulo, what's happening? Sure enough. Hi, sir. How are you? All right. So let's give a little preamble, a little preference, and then we'll get started. So first of all, thanks for joining. I hope more and more are jumping on. Hey, Sylvie, how are you? Muhammad. I'm loving doing these streams. I think I've announced to you this will become a regular thing. Probably most Wednesdays we'll jump on. Now, a lot of the time that I do this, I do what almost everyone else does, and they pick a topic that's germane to their expertise that maybe is relevant to you, and then we start ranting and saying hi and asking a few questions, answering questions. But usually there's a scripted, thoughtful preparation of some sort. I get that. I do a lot of that all the time. You know what? I'm doing this the other day, and I was answering questions, and I started to think, I have only a few superpowers in this world. Sometimes I wish I had more, but the truth is there's a certain area of expertise around leadership and work and success and relationships that all kind of blends together to be my area that I love, that I write about all the time. And not only do I have an ability to speak on stage in a scripted sense or on a book page or a blog, I have another unique thing I really enjoy doing at live gigs over the last decade. It's become something that surprised me. It's the extemporaneous live Q&A, the unscripted portion of the show. It turns out people really, really appreciate a coach who on the fly can give something hopefully useful to talk about. I'd like to try that as a part of today's stream, as the only thing we will do for today's stream. No script, just you and me. I hope you find that helpful. We'll see how it goes. I'd like to jump in without any big update. I'll kind of give you an update later before we sign off after maybe a half hour or so. And start with the question, one that I think is ridiculously germane or relevant to all of us, given what we're dealing with in the virus that's been changing some of our schedules. Javier Serrano was kind enough to jump on the session last time and asked a question, really wanted an answer, and I was too busy ranting. I know I do that sometimes, don't I? And I didn't answer that question, and I really want to. So I'm going to answer it very quickly, and then I'm going to jump on your questions. He said, what do you do basically when you're in a pessimistic mood and you can't shake it? How do you cheer yourself up? Man, how many of us have had that feeling? So let me first say, Javier, you're normal. My friend, you're normal. That is something almost universal for many of us in the last few months. Here's what you do. Admit that it's happening the way you've just done by going public with a question. Kudos to you. That takes a little modicum of bravery. And then you've got to say, you know what? This is happening. This is important. You ready? I'm not going to overindulge it, but I'm going to think about this. I'm going to try to process this, do something with it instead of just being subject to it. The more we try to ignore it and let it lurk and linger, the more it just kind of drags down our mentality and our productivity, and that's not what you do. I want you to think first, Javier, about, well, do you have a root cause? And if you do, you can go try and address that. If you don't, you can still try and shake the way you feel. And here's how you do that. Try and switch tasks. That's the first simple thing. It might actually help you. It helps a lot of people. Just by switching tasks, the brain then switches focus and takes with it a clean slate for your attitude, your mentality. So that could be enough. If it's not, here's what you do. If possible, disconnect from the work because you're currently lost and you've got that mentality, that pessimism hanging over you. Disconnect if possible. Step away and go do something that is a whole lot better. Go think about this, go journal about this, go meditate about this, go call a friend for perspective, a mentor, a coach, or try that, and is the best way to say this. Go find something you know that lifts your spirits. Intentionally go indulge that funny video clip, that best friend who's so funny he makes you laugh, if not cry. With humor, go find that person you love so much they warm you up. And make sure you never overindulge in those moments of pessimism and feeling down. In blame of any kind, these things happen. There's usually plenty of blame to go around. It's not about so much who's responsible, but it's about why you're feeling that way. Clarity does help. And then it's about doing something to make sure you feel better. So give those things a shot. And I got to tell you, if you try those simple tactics, it should help you refocus. Usually it will. If it doesn't, that means you're experiencing something quite persistent, maybe even difficult. Do not be afraid to reach out to the right person for help in that situation. We don't want a feeling of malaise and excess stress to turn into burnout or depression. Be as brave as you were for asking this question and start asking for a little more insight from a professional who might be able to help, whether that's a professional counselor of some sort or a person you can find through your employer's EAP program. Don't let that persist. Make the choice to go address it. Thank you for that question very, very much. Questions are coming in. Next up is, it's interesting. Brian Day, how you doing, sir? Former student of mine. Great to hear from you, man. This is exciting. You say, how does a leader make sure that they're really making decisions based on the right or best or correct information while avoiding groupthink? Well, we don't always know precisely the quality of the information that we're using. What you can endeavor to do, and this is not going to sound overwhelmingly awesome, but it is a great first step. You can endeavor to ask yourself, are we dealing with the best information? Are we succumbing to number one? That's number one. You actually mixed issues here with some decision biases with the quality of the information issue. So the first, for the quality of the information issue, you got to ask yourself, how much time do we have? How important is this decision? And what's the clock? And if you're running out of time, you sometimes have to do what is very difficult for people who like perfection and decisions have to do. You have to make do. You have to go with what you've got. Now, to the extent you have time and it's an important decision, you say to yourself and you ask the group, how do we verify we've got the latest numbers, the best insight, and not too much opinion or innuendo or best guesses? Sometimes that's all you got. Don't accept it, and you find out if you're accepting it by having a conversation. Now, the related thing you brought up is about decision biases, and you mentioned groupthink. What you need is you, one lieutenant or brave other designated person, or an external person who occasionally fits into your group to be a process observer, to use eyeballs that you don't always have, even though you should try to call this out if you see it, but sometimes you're lost in it with everyone else, referring to groupthink in particular. Is there a major well-known bias that's affecting you? Guess what? There is always imperfection on the table when you're making decisions as a group. There is always bias in the room. The only question is whether or not you have endeavored in a reasonable measured amount of time, assuming you have time, to call that out, admit it, and then backtrack and try and rethink anything that's suspect in light of your collective recognition that you might be succumbing, for example, to the lazy, beautiful comfort that comes with groupthink or many other types of biases. I got to tell you this to wrap up a quick answer to your question. I hope this is useful. A decision audit is something you might want to consider. If you've ever thought, hey, you know what, are we succumbing to groupthink? Are we being less productive than we should and maybe really not even being aware of it? That is common. A decision audit is where you all show up ready to not make decisions you have to make, but ready to evaluate and have tons of candor and conversation about the decisions that you've been making. A post-mortem, if you will, to ask yourself, where did we get it right and why? When did we go too fast, fall prey to this thinking trap or that bias? And what can we do next time to help each other through conversation and signaling of some sort to not fall prey to that type of bias again? In fact, a coach, a mentor, an external consultant who understands the details and the many different traps or biases that often impact group decision making, coming into your group to be an extra pair of expert eyes with permission to speak up and tell you what they're seeing can be invaluable. My opinion, you don't have to do this once a month, once a quarter, but once every year or two, a concerted 2-hour meeting to really have the team take all their IQ and think about their decision process and the quality of recent decisions is invaluable for pulling people back to objectivity and reducing the likelihood of biases in subsequent decisions. It's a little weird opening yourself up to that amount of scrutiny, but great teams are not afraid of difficult feedback. Great to hear from you. Great question. I appreciate you. Let's see what we've got here. So what will, Christina, hi Christina. Christina says, what will be some changes organizations will have to take over the next few months or years to adapt and change and be more resilient and flexible? There's, Christina, so much in that question to think about trying to answer. Hey, John. Hey, Legio. How you doing, bud? Lots there. I think if nothing else, and by the way, let me start by recognizing that this crisis has been, well, it's been a pandemic, hasn't it? It's been something of a crisis. We've lost people. We've had people who are ill, and it has shaken many organizations, literally at every size, to their core, asking them, are we managing resources correctly? Are we doing the right thing with our people? And are we strategically thinking about how to come out of this even better than before, as hard as that might be? So, the old political comment, Christina, hey, don't ever let a good crisis go to waste. I think that has been on the just rolling off the tongue of so many people lately, and rightly so. So it's time not for just kindness, congeniality, and deference towards others in a difficult time, because those things are important, of course. It's also time for blunt candor about where we are, how we survive, how we bring others with us to the extent possible, but most importantly, how we craft an operational plan and a strategic plan to make sure that we're navigating these waters effectively if they persist for a long time, and that we understand what a future after this crisis looks like. That might mean core changes to communication tools. How many of us have become Zoom champions, or right now I'm with LinkedIn using StreamYard as technology. So there's going to be a technological change. There will be a large number, a large percent increase in the average number of workers who work remotely full-time and part-time. That will be part of our future, much more so than it ever was before, because it was promised for a long time. We will have new tech, we will have new structured meetings because of that technology. Now, one beautiful silver lining, Christina, that comes out of this that is difficult, but necessary, very necessary, is a reminder that we have to be better, not just in crises, but in general for change management. Change management is a fascinating, often detailed, little tiny subpart of this bigger thing, project management. But the truth is, managing change, especially planned change, requires great inclusion in decision-making, great foresight in how what we might do will impact certain people, getting them thus involved early instead of late to help rollout and execution happen. So our thoughtfulness and attentiveness, our need to reevaluate exactly how we manage change projects is going to come to the forefront, because this situation we're coming through absolutely, positively requires it. One more quick answer, Christina, is that we are now becoming more and more sensitive. And as a leadership guy, I love this, more sensitive to people's needs and mentalities, needs in terms of, for example, work resources, work preferences, and their mentality. That is to say, who's comfortable under these changing conditions? How can I be aware of that? How can I reach out and be useful regarding that? Whether it's help with a new technology, a conversation, a moment to just listen and let someone vent, or whatever it might be. We are heightening our awareness of the need to do that to maximize team performance. And maybe that is a beautiful silver lining. I think there's another 40 good answers to your question, Christina, but I'm going to stop there for right now. Thank you so much for asking a question. John, what do you got here, John? Do you have any tips for leaders to sense the mood of their teams over the phone? Are there good questions, etc., they can ask? John, great question, man. Relevant more than ever, you know this. So first thing I would say is before you ask, which today, believe it or not, is starting to sound like a thing people just say. One of my favorite rules for any leadership behavior is sincerity. What I mean by that is you should not do something because you read the book, you read the article, you listened to do it, or whatever the case may be. You picked up this nugget as a thing you're supposed to probably do. For example, telling people, hey, thanks for this week, have a great weekend. Whatever it might be, the little people-related anecdote, if it's done just because, instead of being done genuinely and sincerely, because you are interested in the outcome, people will sense it. So that's a big caveat. Having said that, don't start with the question, hey, how you guys feeling? I know it's an interesting, difficult, odd, unexpected time. How you feeling? Don't start with that. Start with something that's social, but not that, because there is a very real risk for people to feel fatigue around whatever the massive stress issue is that we all know is ever present lately. And we often unintentionally exacerbate the stress around it by saying, let's focus on it some more, which is what your beautiful and well-intentioned question might do. So start, when possible, with that much social. That's just a great rule in general for a phone conversation with the team, a video meeting, or an in-person meeting, because that creates kind of a social lubricant that really then lets us propel more comfortably into a discussion of work. That's always a great place to start thinking. Now, number two is to listen to what you're hearing, because without asking that question, you're very likely to hear a difference from the baseline that you're used to. Let me explain that. You might hear elevated voices, more rapid speech from someone, excess speech from someone you usually hear more from, or a whole lot less conversation from someone who usually gives a ton. Any of those clear deviations from the baseline that you're used to are strong indicators something, now we don't know what it is, but something is off. Now, if you're in the middle of a crisis situation, you likely know the predictable answer as to what it is. And then, having started social to the best of your ability, having listened for kind of where they are they with you? Are they focused? Does it sound natural? Or are you seeing those deviations? Then it's time for that question. And if you're going to ask that question, I want to give you one more little tiny bit of advice before I try another question. I want you to start with yourself, because very often leaders with the best of intention will ask something of others, something they're invested in and want to understand, but they don't appreciate fully the kind of difference between us in the hierarchy and in status, and the fact that not everyone feels comfortable in light of those normal organizational differences, speaking up and being honest in response to your question. So start with yourself. If you wanted to, for example, say, how's everyone doing? It's been stressful and crazy. You might say, you know what? I could start everyone by asking how you're doing. I'm going to do that in just a second, but let me start by telling you, if you're feeling down, it's okay, because I am too. In fact, yesterday, let me tell you what happened to me yesterday. Yesterday, I had a plan that was so beautiful for being uber productive during the workday. And I came up, well, a little short. And here's why. I got fixated on, boom, fill in the blank, whatever aspect of this difficult situation that you're facing right now. And I got lost, maybe. I got lost in a spiral of negativity, and I was slow instead of fast. And I do this once in a while, not all the time, I'm grateful to say. But I overindulged, I think, and next thing I know, a half hour and then an hour clicked by, and I was stuck on one task for no reason other than what I eventually figured out was that I was overindulging in a place, well, mentally that wasn't good for me. Now, let me tell you how I got out. I got out because I love my dog, or whatever the answer might be, a favorite song, a spouse, a best friend, a mentor. My point is that if you're finally going to go to using that question, you start by talking about yourself and make it short. I'm talking 20 seconds, not 20 minutes. That makes them see you as a little more honest, real, and human, and worth responding to in kind. It doesn't guarantee a good answer from them or a wonderful conversation. It does increase your odds. Thank you for the question. Great question. Here's a quick throwaway real quick. Brian, how do I develop a leadership skill? I'm not sure if you have a specific or a general intent there, Brian, but I'm going to tell you, and this is just fun to mention anytime we're doing a Q&A session like this. Everything you've ever heard me talk about, with very few exceptions, I mean, most things you've ever heard me rant about or write about really are skills. Skills are things people can learn. Let me just share this briefly, and then I'm going to move on to another one. I remember a time I was in class many years ago, a place that I miss, and I was teaching, which was rare for me. I was teaching an undergraduate course on leadership principles, and I only did maybe 2 or 3 of those in 10 years. And it was fun, and it was an auditorium, and it was huge, and I didn't have a personal relationship because there's 350 kids, and I'm in the front, and I'm ranting and raving about leadership one day, and it was after the first day of class. I remember this like it was yesterday. A young kid, a boy, walks up to me and he said, thanks, he enjoyed the lecture. He's looking forward to the class. And while he said that, he started to get a little broken down, and he looked like he was going to cry. He held it together, but you could tell he was getting very sad. And I said to him, are you okay? Did I offend you? What's going on? How can I help you? And then he said, well, if I understood you correct, leaders are kind of born, not made. And I said, no. I must have misspoke. I've written about this. I've talked about this. Please let me try and explain better before you think about this in an unproductive way. Oh, no. Some people are born with advantages, traits that might be useful as we endeavor to be leaders. For example, higher levels of natural communication skill. That is true that the baseline through genetics might be advantageous sometimes for some people, but that's only the first half of the response. The second half is that so much, majority of leadership is about identifying skill areas you want to go learn. A skill is a thing anyone with the right focus, dedication, attitude, and effort can go learn. The vast majority of the leadership skills people like me and so many others talk about all the time are things you can think about, write about, be coached about, be mentored about, take a course about, listen to a podcast about, go experiment with at work, and then receive feedback from yourself, from observations of how others react, from mentors, etc., such that you can have data to use to improve. Skill building is open to every single one of us. The only thing you have to do is commit time and commit to a belief that you are not your best self yet. And when you do that in today's world, well, you're very lucky, because we have so many resources available to you today for skill building. It's unbelievable. We have blogs, we have books, we have seminars, we have university certificate programs, we have courses and degrees. We have LinkedIn Learning, my personal favorite. It's an amazing platform. If you haven't checked it out, I really think you should. Anyone with a premium membership at LinkedIn gets access, and then you get access to me and so many other thoughtful experts who will help you think about life at work, life in general, a whole lot differently and more productively. Lots of resources. Longer answer for a short question than you probably thought. Let me see what else I can find. HR questions employees use their vacation time on their mandated question across the leadership consider. The situation, listen to this, Veer Raghavan, I hope I'm saying that right here. The situation across the world has exposed leadership failures, right? Leadership failures. I think that's true in many organizations and in many governments. I think most of us would probably agree that's true. Even if we argue about specific practices within this crisis that we've faced, I think we would all agree with that premise. So what do you do with that? If I understand, what are the suggestions or tools for using that? Well, I love the question, and let me tell you what we should do with all those failures if we're smart. And that's a big question. I'll let you ponder on your own. But if we're smart, what we're going to do is not turn our back from them, not deny their existence, not blame others for them, The best leaders, and this is universal, admit when things go wrong. Now you'll hear me correctly. I didn't say admit when they are wrong, because their role is one role among many in creating the situation that we are calling a failure. But they do admit fully that things have gone wrong and that they are responsible, in charge, and working on it. They do not blame. So before I tell you what to do with the actual failures themselves, let me start by saying what you don't do. You do not blame and shirk responsibility. This has been true long before this crisis. It is the hallmark of a brave, honest, vulnerable, and willing to improve leader who wants to legitimately say, hey, the buck stops with me. Unfortunately, so many people do know that lots of blame could be spread around. They don't like having to take their share of it. And so they say, no, not really my fault. And guess what? It's their fault. It's their fault, and it's their fault. I'm going to share with you a little acronym. I've got a rated R version to use the movie rating system and a PG version. I'm going to give you the PG version on the live stream here, folks. And I have to tell you, blame is just, for me, it's a reminder, because it stands for barely legitimate, almost meaningless excuse. Excuse is the key word. Excuse is like a drug. We start using it and it becomes addictive, a go-to way to deal with things that you don't like, things that don't work out well, things that don't shine praise upon you. Blame is a sign of a leader who is insecure and does not know how to move forward and make the situation better. So that's the preface. Now, to answer your question, what do we do with them? We keep them close. We articulate what can be learned from them. In a question a few minutes ago, I was talking about a decision-making post-mortem. That's a useful thing. Now, let me give you an example that I've seen many times talked about that's just wonderful. There's a design and strategy firm called IDEO, I-D-E-O. Very famous for their work in areas of creativity as it relates to various products and services for the clients they serve. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe 15 years ago, I don't remember, and I hope they still have it, they had created a library, which I think started just as a bookshelf, frankly, a bookshelf of failure, a bookshelf of products that really bombed, didn't work, never made it to market, people hated, etc., etc. Why? Because that's data. That's reality we went through. That's part of our DNA for learning. That is fuel for getting better and increasing the odds that we do something value added the next time we try to do something creative. Failure during this crisis is not meaningfully different. When we look at how we served our employees, when we look back at how we served our employees or maybe let them down, how our supply chain good and in some ways broken, how our products met needs but should have morphed and did or didn't, etc. That post hoc analysis can be brilliant fuel for redoing our strategic plans and making operational and strategic changes for our organization. Those most painful moments now should become talked about, respected, and highly analyzed bits of learning later. So they should not be hushed as we move forward. I don't think you want to overdwell on them, and you don't want to create too much negativity, and you certainly don't want to blame, but you do want to make them the object of learning overtly with smiles, because learning is everything, and failure only hurts when we fail to turn it into learning. Great question. I hope that was kind of an answer for you. You see what we got here, folks. Hi, Ann. How you doing? I'm seeing lots of people, lots of comments and questions. I love it. Let's see here. Ann, I'm going to answer you real quick. Ann says, I'm not a manager, but management and leadership are separate. I would actually argue against that. That's a whole nother topic. And actually, I'll talk about that too. What skills would be beneficial to develop during this time? And she says she works in healthcare. First of all, Ann, hi, Ann. Thank you so much for what you do. Wow. I don't know how many thank yous you're getting. I hope you're getting plenty during this time. I've spent a lot of time reaching out to my doctors and nurses and psychiatrists and others that I know who are care delivery of some sort and saying thank you. So the first thing is, what skills should we learn during this time? Well, we have to learn emotional management. This should be very obvious. And let me harken back to the first question I took today, which was for Javier. Listen, emotional management during a crisis is so big. Now, emotional intelligence, if you've not looked into it, is a fun, fascinating, and often quite practical area. Tons of books, blogs, courses. Check out LinkedIn Learning. There's several people who talk about it. And in tiny bits, I have. So I have to tell you, when you recognize that you're experiencing strong emotions, which happens in a crisis, almost to everyone, there is often an unproductive impact on decision-making, thinking and decision-making. And so what you want to do is to actively engage them and let them out. Depending on who you are and what the emotions are, you have to find the right space in which to do that. It might be an overt permission that you give yourself to cry or to scream, or to go out behind your house and chop a piece of wood or otherwise break something. There are many short-term, quick, honest, indulgent, but very useful ways to admit and then let out those emotions. That's one of the great examples of a skill during this time we've got to get better at. And here's the last comment on that bit, and then we'll talk about leadership versus management. The last bit there is that you are not always the best person and to know when emotions are hitting abnormal and or unproductive levels for you, which is why success in crisis is rarely about the mythical leader who's great at managing crises. No, it's usually about a handful of people, a team who are good in their own right, but also importantly, great at helping others see what they can't see. Every great leader needs a lieutenant. That's been said for a reason. And I say to you, Ann, and everyone else listening, because I know it's been true for me, sometimes you need a person empowered, a person brave enough to tell you what they see when you're getting too loud, too emotional, past some baseline that looks kind of acceptable, just so at a minimum you can be aware of it. Or if needed, you can correct your course, or maybe even remove yourself from a situation, or potentially make apologies. Who knows exactly what the situation might be, but you don't always see it, so empower someone. Last little bit for you, and then I'm going to take one more question from someone I have yet to read, and then I'm going to wrap up because, man, it's easy to fill a half hour sharing with you guys. She mentioned management and leadership being different. I got to disagree. As much as I like you and appreciate your question, I have to tell you, most thinkers and writers for a long time have said that they're different. And I often agree with the preeminent thinkers and writers out there. Not always, not always. This is one of them where I just don't agree, and I've written about this before, and I think it's useful. So let me just say to you that you don't have to jump in and argue at all if someone says it and you don't agree with them. But what I think of when someone says that is, no, you're not wrong. What's actually happened over time is that slowly but surely in the last 30, 40 years, we've become more enlightened about the possibilities, the potential, the purpose of leadership. And so all the things that are more programmatic, detail-based, boring, bland, just got to do it about this thing we call leadership, well, we actually refer to that as management. That's what managers do. Managers take care of the status quo. Leaders look to the future. There's a million lists where we say things just like that, right? Well, they're not different. The same person has to do both of those the vast majority of the time. So what we've done is taken the worst, most boring parts of being a leader, and we call it managerial, or what managers do. And then we call the fun stuff, inspiring others, leading others, vision, and all those fun sounding things, and we attribute those as things that leaders do. They're actually the same person the vast majority of the time, just different labels based on how much we love the thing that we're talking about that they do. That's my honest take on it. No need to start an argument with anyone if they're ever going to bring that up again, but thank you for asking. Let's see here. GA of Dr. Bright, Melinda, how to motivate teams in difficult contexts. Okay, Melinda, last question of the day. Thank you. Is this a former Wright State graduate assistant of Dr. David Bright? Is that you, Melinda? Man, I hope so. David was an amazing guy, and I bet he's still killing amazing work today. Quick question for you. How do you motivate a team? We could go for hours on that. I'm going to give you about 1 minute and tell you that in particular, during challenging times, the key is to make sure they're heard, that they feel you understand pain that has become an abnormal level, and that you are doing something about it. Let me say that again. Very often leaders want to go, let me help, blah, 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 and they intervene and they talk and they say, here's the answer. That's going to happen in some form. Try not to lead with that. Try to lead with listening. Let me say that again. How do you motivate people during a crisis? Try to lead with listening. When humans under great stress feel listened to and possibly understood, they usually feel a little more in control, a little more calm, more open to a conversation with you about what we're going to do to move forward. You can do that without words. That's the power of listening. And it's even more powerful when times are stressful or you're going through a crisis. Then acknowledge people when they share ideas. Don't tell them, I got you, you're right, we should probably do that. But do tell them you hear them, take notes, and as things develop, get back to them about areas you're going to be able to act on and those you're not. Most importantly, during times of crisis, I want you to remember to share the pain and share the limelight. By sharing the pain, what I mean is you've got to not only acknowledge what they're going through, but to the extent that it's reasonable and possible, listen, you have to go through what they're going through. If they're furloughed and you can't quit, we know that. But if it affects their pay, guess what? It should affect yours. I'm not against high CEO pay. That's another conversation. Don't hear me wrong. But when we see layoffs, furloughs, and other difficult employee decisions that affect pocketbooks while people are receiving large amounts of money at the executive level, you should predict that's going to have a negative impact on morale and productivity. How could you not? Your goal, especially in times of crisis, is to make sure you're not exacerbating those possibilities. And you do that by sharing the pain. Take $1 instead of $1 million if you've already got millions in the bank. How can you not do that? Please tell people that your perks are being cut back. Let them know how. Give up that preferred parking spot, that preferred elevator or cafeteria, whatever it might be, and go literally start enjoying being a man of the people. If you can't do that, why would you expect them to do anything other than feel unmotivated? So share the pain with them, literally roll up those sleeves and go do the work with them. Herb Kelleher, some of you might remember him. If you don't, go look him up. Former head of Southwest Airlines. Got quite famous at one point for being a man of the people, and it was genuine if you could believe what you read about the fella. He would go down to the front lines where people were getting checked in at the airport, say hello, check them in, get bags, and throw them back there, just like a frontline hourly employee. During times of crisis, those behaviors are even more important. You got to want to do it. You got to make it sincere. But when you do that, it helps to relieve tension and help people believe in your leadership. That's invaluable. Also, share the limelight. To the extent during a crisis there are wins that are happening, decisions that are helping us, don't say, hey, I did this for you, didn't I? Never, ever say that, especially during crisis. What you're supposed to say is, man, this team did it again. Bob, that contribution you made had a benefit. Let me tell you what the client actually said and why I'm so grateful you're sitting around this table with us. You share the credit widely as a matter of course, especially during a crisis. Okay, gang, this has been fun. I could do it all day long. If you dig this format, good news for you. I hope to come back and do more straight Q&A coaching sessions just like this. For those who are interested in an update, yes, I'm still working on Live Hard. Another draft story was completed yesterday. I'm very excited. Probably late this year that will be out. You'll hear more from me about that very soon. In fact, if I haven't said this, if you like what you're hearing and want more of it, I hope you'll visit my home on the web at drdewett.com. That's DRDEWETT.com, where you can find a very free, useful, fun, actually quite popular newsletter. I hope you'll sign up. That's where I give people an interesting blog post / essay for every newsletter, some tips that are practical that might help, as well as an update on everything I've got going on. So you can keep up to speed just by dropping in your email. If I can help you offline, hey, I love these streams, but don't hesitate. Drop me a note. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Although I do have a large volume of notes, but I'll do my best to get back to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions. I appreciate you. I hope you're doing well as we try to navigate our way through this crisis. I'll see you next time. Thanks.